impact that Pushkin had on their literature. And I want to quote you something that they say about Pushkin. Pushkin is of immense importance not only in the history of Russian literature, but also in the history of Russian enlightenment. He was the first to teach the Russian public to read. In his verse, the living Russian language was made known to us for the first time. The actual Russian world was opened wide to us. All were charmed and delighted by the mighty harmonies of this new poetry, the like of which had never before been known. And that is by a great Russian critic, Dobroliev Yubov. And there are several Russian critics who've commented on his work. But he got into trouble quite early, as most brilliant young men do. He started to write things that the government felt unhappy about, and he was forced, he was banished, and then he was forced to stop writing, and he came back and he got involved in all sorts of silly adventures. He married a woman who was almost a child to him. She had a lover, and he challenged her lover to a duel, and he was killed. And when he died, they had to stop the universities, they had to stop students from the universities filing passes there because they were afraid of the profound influence Pushkin had on the people. There were many major black figures too which emerged in the church. Few of you are aware of the black popes of Rome. There are 3 black popes of Rome. One of them in particular I should talk about. There are 3 of them. There's one, Victor the First, who profoundly affected, he was in 186 AD, he profoundly affected the Catholic Church because he was the person who forced the Asiatic Christians to accept what the other Christians were doing, to have Easter on Sunday. Then you have Pope Miltiades. Here he is quite clearly. This picture is quite clear. He is African not only in color but in feature. There is no ritual black here, ritually black color, and yet he's represented later as white. And you find this with all the 3 popes. Very clearly African, of African parentage, etc. Here you are. And yet he's represented later as European. And you find that he had tremendous influence in the church because it was under him that the Emperor Maxentius started to give back properties back to the church, and it was Pope Miltiades who helped in bringing back these possessions back to the church. And you find it was during that period that Constantine was converted, Emperor Constantine, and he started to return. He was converted to Christian, and he started to return all the ecclesiastical buildings to the black pope, so that even the building which now has become the Vatican was returned to Pope Miltiades. And you also have Pope Gelasius around 450 AD. That's not the exact date, but it's around that time that you have Pope Gelasius, and you have this influence. He created one of the standard mass books for the masses, Book of the Mass. Okay, it's one of the standard books of the Mass. And he also had quite an influence on the church and was able to maintain unity in the church in spite of great schisms. Few of us are aware of the saints. There are 35 black saints in the Catholic Church. This was the patron saint of Germany, quite clearly an African. This is Saint Maurice. It was only around after the time of just before Hitler that he was removed as patron saint of Germany. You also have quite a number of figures who emerged as a result of liaisons between members of the royal family. Most of the French kings had black mistresses, and one of the French kings, Louis XIV, his wife paid him back in her own coin by having a black lover. It led to the birth of a black daughter to the King of France, King Louis XIV. She was a black daughter. When she was born, the king said to his doctors, "How come I gave birth to a black daughter?" And the doctor said, "You see that man in your coat, Nabo? whom the queen is so fond of, it is possible that he looked at her while she was pregnant. And the king said it must have been a very penetrating look. You will see her picture in the book Black Women in Antiquity, which is on sale here. The nun of Moray, the black nun of Moray. She was put into nunnery because of the scandal. She was put into the nunnery. The Duke of Chartres fell in love with her, but he was forbidden to marry her by the king, and I think she died quite tragically. But you could, barely the royal family would go to visit her in this monastery where she was put. You also have men who became, this is the Duke of Florence, who ruled the Duke of Florence. He was a result of a liaison between one of the popes, Clement VII, and a black mistress. And he was cardinal when he had an affair, Cardinal de' Medici, and he became a pope, and his son was made Duke of Florence, and he reigned there for some time until he was brutally assassinated. You also have the origins of Othello. It was actually a black man. Here is the white man, one of the Gonzagas, who married a black woman. I'm sorry if some of you cannot see this very easily. Who married a black woman. This is in the home, on the roof, on the ceiling rather, his black wife and her daughter, the mulatto. And then comes Othello, who married Desdemona and murdered her on Christmas Day. So it was an actual story. It was recorded by Cincio, and then the novel was taken up by Shakespeare, and it is on this actual black figure that he built Othello. We have quite a number of figures that emerge in European religious and royal families as a result of the mixing and melting of the races in these contexts. I have tried to touch on, and this is just a glimpse, I have tried to touch on some of the movements of Africans into Europe, the movement of Tahata and his garrison, the movement of Batricus into Spain, the movement of the Egyptian ideas and their philosophies and sciences into Greece, the movement of the Carthaginians on the Hannibal at the time when you have a predominantly African element in Carthage, the movement of the Moors, both black and other types, coming into Europe at the time and having a profound influence on European science, which was to be, to some extent, responsible for the European Renaissance. And I have touched on other figures. There are quite a number of them, figures in Russia, in France, in Portugal. In particular, 3 of the Portuguese kings turned out with African-type features, with frizzy hair, with broad noses, with full lips as a result of various liaisons between the kings and their mistresses, so that you have this unsuspected and little-known influence of Africans on Europe itself. The story we have often been told is simply the story of European influence on Africa. And this therefore comes in a sense as a corrective to the image and vision of the African as a passive being, as a mere palimpsest upon which European images and ideas are planted. I want to end this lecture, because there's going to be a lot of time for questions, I want to end this lecture by pointing to the fact that a great damage has been done to the black psyche. And it is not just a question of black consciousness, it's a question of the consciousness of the world being changed. We cannot merely free the black consciousness of other people who have looked at the black in a certain way has to be freed. And this is not just a question only of race, because there are many of our black brothers and sisters who are more racist in their relationship to their own people. Because this is something we have internalized, just as I have found people with white skins who do not partake of this sort of racial consciousness. We have to become aware of that fact, that it's a state of mind. We have to change this. It is no sense merely changing, as we have found in many parts of the world. You change one leader with one type of